I shall salute the sun once again, to the stream that flowed within me, to the clouds that were my tallest thoughts, to the painful growth of aspens in the garden who endured the seasons of drought with me, to the flock of crows who as a gift brought the field's nocturnal scent to me, to my mother who lived in a mirror and revealed the figure of my old age, and to the earth whose burning womb I've filled with green seeds in my lust for repetition, I shall salute once again.
Persians believe that every day can be a birthday because a birthday is not only a natural day of birth but also a process of becoming. To rise with the sun every dawn is to achieve birth. The rite of the ancient prophet Zoroaster was not really the worship of fire so much as the admiration of the sun in nature. For centuries, great Persian poets have used natural imagery as a metaphorical vehicle to celebrate all manifestations of life and to communicate their rich awareness as they unveil life's mysteries. In her evolving journey, Forugh Farrokhzad, a pioneer modern poet, celebrates all forms of earthly manifestations of life. She conceives of rebirth in the imagery of nature's abundance and regeneration, and transforms her revelations into poetry that ranks among the finest modern Iran has given to the world. The involvement with nature can be seen in the poems of the great 13th century mystic poet-philosopher Jalal-ed-Din Rumi. Rumi believed that the evolution of the soul proceeds along many successive stages, leading ultimately to the union with the divine beloved. In Faroukh's view, it is through art that one discovers nature and attains higher stages of life, ultimately finding a form of perpetuation. Her desire to merge with nature, which is life, is a method to overcome death and time. She acknowledges the inevitability of physical death, but seeks rebirth and self-perpetuation through the timeless imagery of nature.
Creative work is a kind of struggle to maintain existence, or else to perpetuate self and negate the meaning of death. Everything that grows is the result of life. One must go into life and experience even the ugliest and most painful moments of life. Every artist must have contact with life. I want a poem to take my hand and take me with it. It teaches me to think, to look, to feel, and to see. Or else it is the result of a perception, a thought, or an instructive vision. I think that creative work should be one with awareness, an awareness connected to life, to existence, to the body, even to this apple that we bite.
Forugh joins nature through poetry, the art that she called the most powerful of loves. She said, "It allows humans complete access to their existence." Love is what awakens all her senses and emotions and guides her creative imagination in the exploration of life. In the poem Rebirth, Forugh merges her lover with nature, thereby perpetuating him through her poetry as well.
My whole being is a dark chant that perpetuating you will carry you to the dawn of eternal growths and blossomings. In this chant, I sighed you. Sighed in this chant, I grafted you to the tree, to the water, to the fire.
Perpetuating her love through poetry and connecting with nature at times leads Forugh to a prophetic vision.
Now forbidding walls, frontier walls rise again, in the quiet night like plants, centuries posted on my love's estate. I can sense it. I know when it's time to pray, now all the stars are making love. Come back with me, come back with me, to the start of creation, to the fragrant core of a fertilized egg, to the moment I was born from you. Come back with me. You've left me incomplete. Now the doves on the tips of my breasts take wing. Now kisses cocooned in my lips stir like butterflies thinking of flight. Now my body's an altar ready for the rites of love. Let me conceive by the moon in the sanctuary of the night. Let me be filled by small raindrops, by infant hearts, by the weight of children not yet born. Perhaps my love could be the womb of another Jesus.
In her profound process of self-discovery and growth, she evolved and attained a level of art that transcends the limits of time and space. Within her brief 15-year career as a poet, Forugh Farrokhzad achieved what many contemporaries have yet to accomplish: a poetic vision that accommodates the self, the society, and the universe. This program will examine Forugh's work, which chronicles her personal and artistic growth as recorded in 5 volumes of poetry. She is a pioneer modern poet whose work, with numerous reprints and translations into several languages, have made her arguably the most famous woman in the history of Persian literature.
There are several reasons why she is so popular with the public in Iran. I believe, first and foremost, she inserted the individual in the arena of our glorious tradition of poetry. She talked about the person. She talked about everyday life. She talked about the joy and the pain congruently. She was full of candor. She always said what she thought, and therefore her poetry is wonderfully indicative of how a whole generation of people felt at a certain period in Iran.
That her main concerns, excuse me, were universal concerns. She was a poet of the whole world, and that is why she speaks so well to me, to you, to my student who reads her poetry in English, to someone who reads her poetry in another language or sees the film, because she does speak that universal language that makes sense to all of us.
Her poems are truly beautiful when they're translated properly, and we know that poetry is that which cannot be translated. But in spite of that, they are a wonderful experience on that level, on an aesthetic level. Furthermore, in spite of all this talk about multiculturalism, women of the Middle East have been denied their complexity in the West. They have been reduced to one-dimensional characters. And the poetry of a person such as Forugh Farrokhzad, who is, in the real sense of the word, a wonderfully complicated person, will show the complexity of Middle Eastern women. Furthermore, it would be great for the American audience to become aware of the similarities of the lives of women in Iran and in the West.
She really expressed the struggle of many women in Iran. She was ahead of a generation of women who were trying, since the constitutional revolution, to gain rights, to break out of these traditions, or to break out of this convention-bound society. She had a public mission, and she felt it, and she was very conscious of it, and she tried to express that through her poetry. That is why we really have to take that poetry very seriously and put it within the context of women's movement and put it within the context of the democratic movement within Iran.
Modern Iranian literature has been the offspring of the social and political movements of the turn of the century. During the Constitutional Revolution, between 1906 and 1911, up to the 1920s, many new periodicals and newspapers were published. The freedom of expression spurred by these journalistic activities provided the impetus for the emergence of modern literature in Iran. Contemporary writers who were stimulated by the numerous democratic movements were anxious to enlighten the masses and help them to envision an attainable freedom from domestic dictatorship and foreign intervention.
All literary figures in general, men and women, would be at once sort of a means to channel and to celebrate a certain kind of ideology that was going on. And at the same time, by doing that, by writing poems, by producing literature, in that way that was cherished by Iranian culture, they would also wind up influencing other people. When people talk about women's liberation and they talk about women's participation in that, they'll probably more often than not refer to literary figures like Ehtesami, like Forugh Farrokhzad, before they'll actually talk about some of the more political and journalistic figures. There's a certain attraction to the art, and I think that's one of the ways in which poets and authors in Iran contributed to all social movements of various sorts, and that's also true of the women's movement.
A new group of diverse women writers and poets appeared on the Iranian literary scene during this period.
A new journal was published in Tehran called Iran No, meaning New Iran. This was a social democratic journal. It was affiliated with the first Iran's party, Democrat Party. And the journal turned over its pages to a woman activist, an intellectual woman of the period.
And the participation of women in the Iranian press had one major point. That is inclusion of women in the Iranian nation. Initially, they were writing into progressive papers like Iran No and Sud Esrafil, but after that, around 1910, women began publishing their own newspapers, particularly Danesh in 1910 and Shokufe in 1913.
In 1935, when Forugh was born, Iran was still undergoing dramatic changes. The events during the interim period from the Constitutional Revolution of 1906 to the fall of the Qajar dynasty in 1925 led to the dictatorship of Reza Shah Pahlavi. The glorious literary movement of the constitutional period was brought to a close. The heroes of the revolution were executed and political publications were banned and suppressed. However, by the time Forugh started going to school, Reza Shah had been deposed. With his departure in 1941, Iran entered into a new democratic era. It seemed as though the history of Iran had been given an abrupt twist for the second time in the century, and the freedom of expression was once again a possibility for modern writers, and women as well.
After the collapse of Reza Shah's regime in 1941 and the occupation by the Allies, the image that had been carefully maintained in the Iranian press of modern Iranian womanhood, according to the regime, collapsed as well. Alongside that, for the first time, Iranian women in the 1940s, when they write in the Iranian press about what they want, they talk strictly in terms of what's best for women, separate from the interests of men. And that's the first time you see this on any kind of a consistent basis. Women talking about the right to vote, aggressively, about the right to work, and completely decoupling that from domestic duties.
During this period, a new generation of Iranian writers emerged who were allowed considerable freedom of expression in innovative art forms, particularly in poetry and short story writing. By 1949, the majority of Iranian writers were also participating in post-World War II politics. An overwhelming number of them were active in the progressive socialist movements, in which the Tudeh Party played a major role. This includes such outstanding and influential poets such as Nima Yushij, the father of Iran's modern poetry. At this time, modern poetry was in its early development. It began with Nima in the 1920s and continued into the late 30s with the poetry of Shamlu, Akavane Sales, Seperi, and Forugh Farrokhzad, who comprised the next generation of poets. Nima broke down the symmetric and repetitive form, as well as the pattern of rhythm and rhyme in Persian poetry. He infused modern subjects, images, diction, and perspectives into poetry. Behind his simple language, there was profound humanity as well as beauty. Forugh Farrokhzad was among a group of modern women writers and poets who blossomed in the 1950s and later gained a prominent place in Iranian contemporary literature.
By the 1940s, women are talking about suffrage, women's political rights. When we move to the period of the 50s and 60s, for the first time, women writers such as Forugh Farrokhzad are talking about women's sexuality and inviting women to express her sexuality, something that had not been discussed in the previous writing and scholarship, and a move away essentially from the notion that the education and modernization is aimed at making a woman a better mother and a better housewife. This is a very different argument, a very different discourse. It's not talking about a woman as an individual with all her passions and emotions and feelings, and that the fact that she has a right to express them and she has a right to determine her life as she sees it, and not be simply one who's going to be a better companion for the male. And so Forugh really makes a major contribution in this regard.
The promising ascendance of modern literature would soon be threatened by the political turbulence in Iran in the early 50s. The overwhelming support for Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh and his efforts to nationalize the Iranian oil industry in 1951 made him a target of hostility by Mohammad Reza Shah and his British and American allies. In August 1953, the Shah was forced to flee the country. But a week later, with the aid of the British Intelligence Service and the American CIA, Mossadegh was overthrown, and the Shah was returned to Tehran. He proceeded to rule with gradually increasing power. His return inflicted another blow upon the Iranian people and the newly formed modern literary movement. When the oil crisis arose, Forugh was living in Tehran. She was 16 and getting married. Although she never finished high school, she continued to write poems and study painting. She grew up in a family of intellectuals. Her father, Colonel Farrokhzad, had a great role in the artistic and intellectual growth of Forugh and her brothers and sisters. She became a mother during the August 1953 CIA coup d'etat. Her writing at the time was traditional ghazal poems that were never published. Despite the political oppression marked by the early 50s, a few contemporary poets continued to write modern verse that reflected their political and cultural awareness. Ahmad Shamlu was the closest to Forugh in terms of poetic taste and sentiments. Among this handful of Iran's contemporary poets, Forugh Farrokhzad has a firm and significant place.
Forugh is one of the characters in the history of Persian art that nobody can deny her. And there's going to be a lot of books, which is published already, about her poetry, but it's going to be books about her life, her philosophy of life. I don't separate her life, actually, with her art. They're like this.
What she thought set her poetry apart from other female or male poets in Iran, in contemporary Iran, the honesty of her poetry set it apart. The fact that she expressed her feelings, and that in Iran, in the context of Iranian literature and poetry, I think had no precedence.
I'm sure there are a lot of artists, writers, people who do theater, film. They are influenced by her attitude towards life, actually. Not the symbols that she uses, because this is so general. Anybody can use the symbols that she used, but she had this courage to use them the time that nobody else was using.
I've been with Forugh maybe 10 times or 12 times, sometimes in parties, sometimes at her own house. And but of course the best was when she came and posed for me. She came to my studio, and she had a sense of repartee, which is very uniquely Iranian. She wrote whatever she believed in. She was honest, and she was innocent, and she was open and frank, and very revolutionary for a woman in Iran at that time.
Farrukh's first 3 volumes of poetry were published between 1955 and 1958. The collections clearly demonstrate the influence of Romanticism on her work. She was 20 when her first collection, The Captive, appeared. Although passionate love and sexuality are often central to the themes of this collection, it also tells the story of a frustrated woman living in a traditional society with serious limitations.
I think about it, and yet I know I'll never be able to leave this cage, even if the warden should let me go. I've lost the strength to fly away. Every morning from behind the bars, my child's eyes smile at me as I start to sing his kissing lips near mine. God, if I need to fly one day from behind these silent bars, how will I answer this child's wet eyes? Let me be. I am a captive bird.
Following the publication of The Captive, Forugh left her husband and lost custody of her only child. A year later, she suffered a nervous breakdown and attempted suicide. Many poems in The Wall and Rebellion, the second and third collections, exhibit significant differences from the first volume. The very titles of the book capture their dominant mood of defiance. In Rebellion, Forugh expresses a wide range of social frustrations and bitterly criticizes her society for its injustices against women. In some poems, she questions conventional religious beliefs. As a whole, the collection embodies a mood and anger reminiscent of the Rubaiyat of Khayyam, a well-known Persian poet and philosopher of the 11th century. Disregard for conventional norms and love with its emotional and physical manifestation remain her central themes. Some poems in The Wall contain the most daring expressions of sexual intimacy and female desire, unprecedented in the history of Persian literature.
Forugh is engaging in an act of self-revelation, and when she reveals part of herself, that comes out to be a feminine side, the part of a soul of a feminine poet, as opposed to a masculine poet. She is much more concerned about qualities that are intimate, that are nurturing. Many of her poems shows a feminine side in the sense that she reveals the other lover, she reveals her beloved. And in one of her poems, for example, she says that her beloved is not like a typical Majnun, which is a classical metaphor for the lover, for the beloved in the Iranian poetry, in the sense that this is not she is not interested in a lover who just wants to be another Majnun. She's interested in a lover, and she describes her lover as being somebody who is interested in Forugh as a person, and he is willing to encounter her and love her on an egalitarian term, and much more egalitarian terms. So in that sense, that tells me that that's a feminine soul of a poet speaking through. A poet that is not finding the typical male lover in the Iranian poetry to be satisfying for her, and she is remythologizing that whole metaphor more to the liking of a feminine soul.
And I appreciate the content of her earlier poetry far more than the later poetry, because I think she was far more honest in her earlier poetry. She expressed certain issues that within the conventional, traditional society of Iran, as far as the gender relations were concerned, had a revolutionary impact. But that impact did not go far enough because the issues that she brought up, these issues were dismissed immediately after these collections came out. And even her own colleagues the poets in Iran, the male intellectuals, did not like to talk about those poems. The poems known as, for example, I sinned, that famous line that she says, I sinned, and we know that she's talking about having an affair. She's talking about her sexual experience. Okay, those were dismissed right away, and the collections that came out carried no introduction.
Beside a body tremulous and dazed, I sinned. I voluptuously sinned. Oh God, how could I know what I did in that dark retreat of silence? In that dark retreat of silence I sat, disheveled, beside him. Passion poured from his lips into mine. Saved I was from the agony of a foolish heart. Passion struck a flame in his eyes. The red wine danced in the glass in the soft bed. My body shivered drunk on his breast. I sinned. I voluptuously sinned. In arms hot and fiery, I sinned in his arms, iron strong, hot, and avenging.
In the context of Iran's post-CIA coup era, the poem I Sinned was not only considered the surrender of body to passion, but also of pen to tabooed expression.
When a woman in the 50s openly says, I sinned, I voluptuously sinned, this is a political act. In her earlier poetry, for a woman to be able to author her desire the way she did, to be able to talk about her needs, for a woman to be able to insert a woman, be she a mother, a wife, a daughter, a sister, a poet, an artist, a philosopher, in a poetry the way she did, is a political act.
She is political in the sense that she demonstrates some of the most apolitical subjects in life, subjects of intimacy and intimate relationships, to be also political. She's politicizing what is intimate and what is private and what is not necessarily out for the public.
In Conquest of the Garden, Farokh subverts the nature of the man-woman relationship portrayed by spiritual and secular myths. She reappraises and radically reforms ideas and norms deeply held in her society. Using the familiar context recorded in the biblical and Quranic texts, she rewrites the story of the fall. Throughout Conquest of the Garden, nature imagery celebrates the natural and harmonious association of the lovers. The garden becomes a place of trust where both man and woman can lower their defenses, strengthen each other, receive the full force of love, and welcome intimacy and dialogue.
The crow that flew over our heads and plunged in the perturbed thought of a passing cloud, whose cry traversed like a short spear the expanse of the horizon, will carry out news to town. Everyone knows that you and I gazed at the garden and picked the apple from that coy and distant branch. Everyone fears, but you and I joined the water and mirror and light and did not fear. In the green, flowing forest, in the anxious, cold-blooded sea, in the strange, haughty mountain, we asked, one night of the wild hares, the pearl-filled shells, the eagles, what must be done? Everyone knows we found our way into the cold and silent repose of phoenixes. We found the truth in the little garden, in the bashful look of a nameless flower, and eternity in the never-ending moment when two suns gaze at each other.
I think people like Farokh were very much concerned with the spirituality in a much broader sense of the term, and for a wide number of reasons, and one of which was the stability that I just referred. But I think the sensitive and intelligent person that Farokh was made her very much aware of how important the spirituality has been in the history of this culture, which was now her culture. So ignoring it, putting it aside, would deprive her from a communication line in the simplest sense of the term. How would she be able to speak to these people whom she loved very much and wanted to be talking about their pains and pleasures? I think there are a lot of dimensions to her understanding of spirituality and the way she used it as an artist. On one level, she used it as a literary tool because it resonated with people. Like she could use, for instance, in the poem Ayahay Zamini, she's using the scriptural structure and she's speaking to us as the Bible does. But instead of talking about the creation of the earth, she talks about how it's being destroyed, how faith is being destroyed.
Ayahay Zamani, or Earthly Verses, and Conquest of the Garden are fine examples of Farrough's mature poetry. They are among the 35 poems in her fourth collection, Rebirth. They celebrate the rebirth of an artist who rejoices in her new life. Her vision of the world broadens from femininity to humanity. Farrough's search for personal identity is now replaced by the search for identity and purpose in society.
I no longer look to poetry as a means of expression of a simple feeling in myself. The more poetry permeated me, the more I expanded and discovered more and more new worlds. I think a person involved in artistic work must first of all create and perfect him or herself, then emerge from the self and look at one's own self as one unit of being and existence, so that one can give all her or his perceptions, thoughts, and feelings the tenor of universality.
Critiques have talked about various stages in her poetry. I believe that she went through various phases. Borrowing from Western feminist criticism, I have argued that she went through 3 phases. She started as a feminine poet, feeling trapped as a woman, as a mother, as a housewife. The second stage was a feminist stage, where she felt she can make a difference. She has to change her life, and in order to do that, she has to change herself, and she accomplished that. And then there is a final phase that is called female stage, where she has she's managed to do away with the anger of the previous phase, the entrapment of the first phase. And she has become a poet who happens to be a woman. Her later poetry, although stamped by her gender, is really beyond some of the earlier themes. It's become much more universal.
Farrough's newly developed universal outlook urged her to search for a more free-flowing structural writing style. She began to believe in a freedom of language that would relate to the ordinary realities of the street.
I don't accept taking refuge in a room and looking inward under the present conditions. If you don't go out on the street, it is not certain that your thinking will be in harmony with the reality that takes place on the street.
She had this power over the language, Persian language. And the symbols that she used, it was everyday life symbols. She talks about bazaar, she talks about people around her, she talks about the garden in her yard, she talks about how winter affects that. She's so surreal at the same time.
She didn't like my paintings. She thought my paintings were too busy, I spoke too much. She said I had too many things in one painting. In an exhibition, I included a portrait I had done of her during that summer that I was in Iran. I returned from the United States for the whole summer, and I painted a few paintings, and one of them was her portrait, and I exhibited in Borghese Gallery. It's a very Italian name for an Iranian gallery. And she came to that gallery and she looked at my painting and she just sighed and she says, "Oh, you make me sick." She says, "You talk too much, Hannibal, in your paintings. Why can't you be simple?" She in fact turned around, she said, "The only painting that's worth in this exhibition is the portrait you've done of me." Basically an Oriental, I think. If she was like she preferred Japanese haikus or two-line short poems, even though later in her life she has written very, very long poems and very complicated poems. If she was around, I would point to some of her poetry. I would say that they're exactly like my paintings.
No poem of Forugh seems closer to her life in sound, diction, and techniques, in terms of language, form, and images, than the title poem, Rebirth, where she mingles the idea of growth and rebirth with a search for the meaning of life.
زندگی شاید یک خیابان دراز است که هر روز زنی با زنبیلی از آن می‌گذرد. زندگی شاید ریسمانی است که مردی با آن خود را از شاخه می‌آویزد. زندگی شاید طفلی است که از مدرسه برمی‌گردد. زندگی شاید عبور گیج رهگذری باشد که کلاه از سر برمی‌دارد و به یک رهگذر دیگر با لبخندی بی معنی میگوید صبح بخیر. زندگی شاید آن لحظه مسدودی است. دستهایم را در باغچه میکارم، سبز خواهم شد، میدانم و پرستوها در گودی انگشتان جوهریم تخم خواهند گذاشت. گوشواری به دو گوشم می آویزم از دو گیلاس سرخ همزاد و به ناخنهایم برگ گل کوکب می چسبانم. سفر حجمی در خط زمان و به حجمی خط خشک زمان را آبستن کردن. حجمی از تصویری آگاه که ز مهمانی یک آینه برمی گردد و بدین سان است که کسی می میرد و کسی می ماند.
The thoughts of a powerful mind occupy a larger volume on the line of time and leave their imprint for generations to come. It is in this way that Forugh overcomes time in our modern world. She became deeply involved in her work in the 60s, expanding at a breathtaking rate while constantly searching for new avenues of artistic expression.
Forugh was not those artists that stand still. She wanted to create, and she was looking for a medium to create it. That's why she went after film. She did theater, actually. She was a painter herself. She did graphic art, she did drawings. One of her portraits is very famous, it gets printed everywhere. But she came through a lot of writing and throwing out and writing and going to Europe and meeting different people or so. Came through this growth.
When Forugh was writing the last collection of poems in the late 50s, the contemporary art movement in Tehran was on the rise. She became acquainted with many intellectuals in the movement, one of which became her life partner, Ebrahim Golestan, a well-known writer and filmmaker. Golestan, to whom Rebirth was dedicated, was a modernist of keen intellect, with a remarkable sensibility and considerable talent. He had published 2 collections of short stories before turning to cinema, and then emerged as the maker of powerful and eloquent documentaries. Forugh became an integral part of the Golestan Film Studio in 1958 and worked there until her last days. The relationship which developed between Forugh and Golestan cannot be explained in ordinary ways. It was a rare attachment of 2 artists that coincided with and affected a profound process of self-discovery and growth for both. Forugh collaborated with Golestan in the making of several documentaries and feature films. Between 1959 and 1961, she spent several months in England studying the technical aspects of filmmaking. Back in Iran, she started to make documentaries and edited a film called A Fire, produced and directed by Golestan. A Fire is the story of a 1958 oil well fire in Avaz that was extinguished by an American firefighting crew. The film juxtaposes the blaze with the surrounding landscape and village life. It won a prize at the Venice Film Festival in 1961, but oil companies banned the documentary for its social commentary. Forugh assisted and played in several other short films and documentaries. Her poetic impression left a significant impact on the images and themes of Golistan's films. Faroukh's long satirical poem, O Bejeweled Land, shares many images and themes with Brick and Mirror. It depicts the gloomy social realities of a modern mechanized world, as well as pseudo-intellectualism, hypocrisy, bureaucratic government institutions, and red tape.
The cinema has enhanced her poetry, her looking at images, images, and using them in her poetry, and especially the sequence of cinema, of long shot or close-ups, to look at life with a camera, zoom on things, see little things, see eyelashes, see the mole, and then see the totality, and mix these different visions in a nice composition so that it's are not tiring, as the cinema does. She would edit, as she would describe something, she would look at it as a camera would look.
In the fall of 1962, Forugh directed her first and only documentary about a leper colony outside of the city of Tabriz entitled The House is Black. The film was acclaimed internationally and won the prize for the best documentary at the 1964 Oberhausen Film Festival in West Germany.
I remember vividly the first time I saw the movie. I was glued to the televisions. But I remember thinking to myself, this is what art is all about. Look at how this woman managed to create beauty in a leper's colony. How she managed to show strength at a point where you think this is the ultimate of powerlessness. These people trapped in a colony. Yet, she managed to portray them with such dignity and with such humanity. The movie did so many things on so many levels. Again, on an aesthetic level, it was beautifully executed movie. She narrated it, and I think she has a beautiful voice. There was a political message. The message was, in a rich country such as ours, why do we have such a colony? And of course there was a philosophical message that perhaps in a way we are all like the people she was filming, that life is a form of captivity. And if we don't transcend our habits, if we are captives of our habits, we end up being like that man whom, if I remember correctly, is constantly walking back and forth in the movie.
Shortly after the film was made, Forugh adopted a leper boy from the colony and took him to Tehran to live in her mother's house. Tehran, in the mid-60s, was rapidly growing and westernizing, with skyscrapers looming over empty lots, beggars standing outside nightclubs, and the gap between the poor in the south and the upper-class Tehranis in the north widening. Political dissidents, modern writers and poets who expressed their outrage at these dreadful conditions either encountered censorship or the brutal treatment of the Savak, the Shah's secret police. A number of Faroukh's later poetry reflects the social and political changes of her country. In these poems, she employs metaphors and direct symbolism to convey her political and ideological vision.
And I read her poetry, and poetry that was printed in Shah's regime in time. I am surprised at how they were printed, how they were accepted or allowed. I think she knew how to play that role very well. She didn't have an air or about her that she was political on the surface, but deeply in her poetry, she was very, very a good social critic, social conscious.
A person with her level of social awareness, of emotional awareness, of concern for other people cannot be anything but political. However, I think we have to be very careful when we talk about Faroukh's politics, because it was not, in my opinion, it was not party politics. It was not petty politics. It was not exhibitionist.
Faroukh's social and political views about her society were best mirrored in a poem called Someone Who Is Like No One. The poem's solid structure, with its free and prosaic style, conveys Faroukh's dream of an Iranian society based on justice.
I've had a dream that someone is coming. I have dreamt of a red star, and my eyelids keep twitching, and my shoes keep snapping to attention, and may I go blind if I'm lying. I have dreamt of that red star when I wasn't asleep. Someone's coming, someone's coming. Someone who is with us in his heart, in his breath, in his voice. Someone whose coming cannot be arrested and handcuffed and thrown in jail. Someone, amidst firecrackers from the sky above Tubkhani Square, will come and will spread the tablecloth and will distribute the bread and will distribute the Pepsi and will distribute the public park and will distribute the whooping cough syrup and will distribute enrollment day and will distribute every bloated thing and will give us our share too. I dreamed.
Someone Who Is Like No One belongs to Let Us Believe in the Beginning of a Cold Season, a collection of 7 poems written between 1964 and 1966 and posthumously published in 1974. In these poems, Farroukh reaches a level of poetic beauty and lyricism that seems to belong to the emergence of a new vision.
Poetry for me now is a serious matter. It is a responsibility I feel confronting my own existence. It is a kind of answer that I must give to my own life. I do not think that one can rely on talent alone. Writing a good poem is as difficult and requires as much precision, work, and toil as a scientific discovery. I believe in one other thing, too. That is, being a poet in every moment of life. Being a poet means being a human being.
Let Us Believe in the Beginning of a Cold Season depicts Faroukh's denunciation of her oppressive society, in which her helplessness to influence it breeds loneliness, but leads to hopeful defiance. The complex structure of the poem is indeed intellectually challenging. Inspired by her cinematic experiences, she uses juxtaposition of images and symbols which make the poem pause to deepen its meaning rather than move in a linear progression. Let Us Believe in the Beginning of a Cold Season is Faroukh's masterpiece, who at the age of 32 establishes herself not only as a truly modern poet, but as a philosopher with a remarkable integrity.
And here I am, a lonely woman, at the threshold of a cold season, coming to understand the earth's contamination and the elemental sad despair of the sky, and the impotence of these concrete hands. Time passed, and the clock chimed 4 times. It chimed 4 times. Today is the first day of winter. I know the secret of the seasons and understand the moments well. The Savior is asleep in his grave, and earth, the kind acceptor, earth, invites me to peace. Perhaps those 2 young hands were true, those 2 young hands buried below the never-ending snow. And next year, when spring sleeps with the sky beyond the window, and shoots thrust from her body, the green shoots of empty branches will blossom. Oh, my dearest one, my dearest only one, let us believe in the beginning of a cold season.
It was on a Monday afternoon, about 4 p.m., February 15th, 1967, when Forugh died in an automobile accident. At her burial ceremony in a small cemetery located in the foothills of the Alborz Mountains in Tehran, heavy snow was falling. Iranians often refer to Forugh by her first name, indicating the intimacy between her and her readers. Her first name, Forugh, means brilliance and radiance, and her last name, Farrokhzad, means born with a face shining with glory. True to her name, Forugh Farrokhzad radiates with self-confidence, and, certain of her power to reach her readers, celebrates a victory over the constraints of time and space. She is immortal.
Why should I stop? The road passes through the capillary veins of life. The fertile quality of atmosphere in the womb of the moon will kill the corrupt cells. And in the chemical expanse after sunrise, there is only the voice that will be absorbed in the atoms of time. Why should I stop? The trees are my ancestors. Breathing stale air depresses me. A bird already dead counseled me to remember flight, to join the glowing essence of the sun. Such union is the ultimate in power. Pouring down the light of understanding, windmills naturally fall apart. Why should I stop? Under my breast, I press a sheaf of unripe wheat, nursing it. The voice, the voice, the voice, only the voice of the tall yearning of plants to grow, the voice of the transparent wish of water to flow, the voice of starlight pouring on the surface of the pistil of the earth, the voice of conception of the seed of meaning and expansion of love's common mind, the voice, the voice, the voice, it is only the voice that remains.